condemned once as a positive element for peace by the UN officials, committed acts which earned the condemnation of Amnesty International, women's rights organizations, the international press and countries close and beyond. Under the Taliban rule, schools were closed to girls. Women, comprising half of the labor force, including 25,000 widows, were forced to stay home and not attend work. They were further told not to go out shopping. Those who did, facing public chain lashing and physical beat-up. One Afghan woman raised her complaint to the New York Times correspondent by saying, quote, "In the United States, women are being launched into space, but here in Afghanistan, women are being told that they have no place but in the home." October 6, 1996. The mass exodus to the north due to the Taliban welcome involved as many as 250,000 people. Many people were driven out of their homes and their properties confiscated. One 8-year-old girl's finger was cut, and I repeat, one 8-year-old girl's finger was cut because she had put nail polish on it. So far, over 280 people, as reported, have had either the leg or the arm amputated without consideration to the real precepts of Islamic jurisprudence. The list of brutal punishment goes on and on. Let me, Mr. President, suffice with what Amnesty International has termed the situation in Kabul as, quote, reign of terror, unquote. Latest report by the international news media indicate that mass arrests, abduction, and house-to-house search after nightfall in Kabul continue. According to Amnesty International, as many as 1,000 civilians in Kabul have been rushed to the frontline minefields to clear the mines by walking over. Photo labs in Kabul have been closed. Kabul citizens have been given 10 days grace to smash their television sets. Non-compliance to the rule would subject them to severe punishment. Employees have been ordered to grow beard in 6 weeks or face dismissal. Videotapes and audio cassettes are banned. Cinemas are shut down, and many archival, historical, and cultural motion pictures and documentaries have been set on fire in public. Reuters, October 10, 1996. Irreplaceable ancient artifacts, statues, and paintings in Kabul Museum and other historical sites have either been set ablaze or crushed. Sports are outlawed. Reporters and journalists are beaten up. Reuters reports, and I quote, "At least 2 reporters have been beaten just north of Kabul, and one who had his camera smashed complained to the Taliban authorities in Kabul. He said he was told he deserved the beating." Reuters, October 13, 1996. In the midst of being rolled back, the Taliban have taken scores of young men and elderly hostage in the area around Charikar, Qarabagh, and Jabal Saraj in the north. At least 5 of them were slain on October 10, 1996, as reported by Phil Godwin of the BBC. Mr. President, conscription under the desperate Taliban has made way even to the mosque in Kabul, where the Taliban have set each mosque a quorum of 100, quote, forced to fight, unquote, young civilian worshippers. These teenage forced to fight select heading to frontline minefields are so cherished with words of farewell on their leave, quote, "Guys, cheer up. You are lucky we are deploying you for martyrdom," unquote. Mr. President, the flow of assistance to the Taliban through the border points of Torkham and Spin Boldak is increasing. That is why, in a letter dated October 9, 1996, addressed to the President of the Security Council, document S/1996, 842, October 1096, we requested that the Office of the Secretary General for Afghanistan, OSGA, will take appropriate measures in order to put under supervision the above border crossings. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, last year, through a memorandum, the Islamic State of Afghanistan asked the Security Council, in order to verify different aspects of the intervention aimed at clearing obstacles to peace in Afghanistan, that a fact-finding mission be dispatched to Afghanistan. No attention was paid to this request. During this speech delivered on April 9, 1996 here in the Security Council, dispatching of a fact-finding mission aimed at assessment of degree and level of foreign intervention, Taliban violation of human rights, and Taliban mass engagement and cultivation, processing, and trafficking of drugs was requested. Comprehensive reports were compiled and submitted to the authorities of governments of the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, UNDCP, authorities of the Saudi Arabia, and others about the Taliban drug trade. However, the National Drug Control Strategy 1996, published by the White House, puts the, quote, worldwide potential net production, unquote, of opium from Afghanistan between 92 and 95 to have doubled from 640 metric tons to 1,250 metric tons. Drug enforcement experts claim that last year Afghanistan flooded the European, US, and Eastern markets with over $75 billion of heroin. The Independent, October 1st, 96. And Mr. President, the latest UN International Drug Control Program on Afghanistan opium production, 96, says that, quote, Taliban control some 95% of the poppy growing areas in Afghanistan, unquote. Once again, we are asking and urging the United Nations to send a fact-finding mission into Afghanistan, where the authorities of the Islamic State of Afghanistan would leave at their disposal all hardcore evidences related to different aspects of the continued conflict there. The mission would also look into the chemical weapons used against Afghan government troops in battles just east of Kabul and Lataband, Band Ghazi, and Polycharkhi on the eve of 26th and 27th of September 1996. Mr. President, addressing this Council from this podium, as I addressed the General Assembly meeting last week, I sometimes wonder to myself whether this international body needs fundamental and structural reforms, whether there are faults and shortcomings in our commitments, or whether this institution has become the instrument of power politics for the rich and powerful at the cost of the poor, oppressed, and weak. Allow me to address another crucial subject, Mr. President, raised by some countries, namely arms embargo on Afghanistan. It is our understanding that the embargo should be applied against the government which sends these officers and mercenaries in Afghanistan, blatantly violating United Nations Charter and recognized principles of international law. No article of the Charter stipulates such a measure to be carried out against the government of a member state, which itself is a victim of foreign intervention and conspiracies, and which is defending its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Mr. President, an idea is being floated around that the international monitoring team are to be assigned to report on the importation of arms, ammunition, spare parts by the Afghan government. It is quite clear that such a proposal is only a prescription to invite the armed groups fighting the government to broaden their actions of armed aggression simply because no monitoring is particularly feasible along the porous boundaries adjacent to the territories they are occupying. Afghanistan, as an independent, indivisible, unitary state, enjoys its national sovereignty. The Afghan government has the duty to take necessary measures to defend its territorial integrity and national unity. In accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, Afghanistan has the inherent right of self-defense. Any attempt to prevent Afghanistan to strengthen its national defense as a sovereign state would therefore be against the United Nations Charter and particularly against the interest of peace and stability and security in the region. Had the government of Afghanistan been convinced that not importing arms, ammunition, and spare parts would effectively serve securing peace in Afghanistan, it would voluntarily decide not to use and practice this very right recognized by international law. As far as the implementation of arms embargo against the armed groups fighting the government is concerned, these groups are not legal, subject to international law. Their accountability and their observance of any resolution in this regard is neither legally or practically credible. The only legal instrument would be the implementation of the curb of illicit transfer of arms to such groups from abroad. The Islamic State of Afghanistan agrees with the majority of member states that the Security Council does not adopt any resolution, the implementation of which would be exhaustively burdensome and eventually unattainable. More than 1,250-kilometer frontiers in the southeast and south of Afghanistan are unguarded. The requirements of practically implementing an embargo on such a ground are not workable, and the financial implication involved should be exorbitant. The parties involved will continue to fight by using their arms at their disposal, even if supposedly a quasi-impossible arms embargo is announced. Those recommending the formation of a Security Council committee to consider any information brought to its attention by states concerning the violations of the embargo have to answer the following question. How about the violation by the military intelligence service like ISI? These violations have always been considered as official secrets of military intelligence service and by definition cannot be the object of an investigation by the civilian or international authorities. Such a proposal would have one equivalent. The delegation of the country responsible for 99% of interventions in Afghanistan proposes in a draft. It has circulated the refraining by all states from interfering in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. Mr. President, let me now consider a solution to the present crisis in Afghanistan. You all may be aware that forces of the Islamic State of Afghanistan have been able to recapture most areas recently seized by the Taliban. Presently, our forces are at the gates of Kabul, the capital. The most important factors in these successes have been the popular uprising of the people of Parwan and Kapisa provinces. The men and women proved wrong the propaganda chanted by the sponsors of the Taliban that people welcome the Taliban wherever they went. On the other hand, there have occurred major power shifts in the positions of forces inside Afghanistan. The Pakistani-backed invasion of Kabul has brought together forces that for the past 4 years stood against one another. This manifests that when facing crisis, jeopardizing national unity and sovereignty and territorial integrity, despite having the past bitter enmity and experiences, Afghans will unite against foreign conspiracies. The agreement reached on October 10, 1996 in Mazar-e-Sharif and on October 11, 1996 in Khinjan reminds us about the aspirations of national unity, which the Afghans have exhibited throughout history, including against foreign invaders, among them British Empire and the Red Army. The latest agreement considers two major points. One, the establishment of the Supreme Council of Transitional State, headed by